Hello, I'm Jesse May. Welcome to the Matchbook Betting Podcast. We hope wherever you're listening or watching us from, you're staying safe and staying at home. Today, NFL Draft, which I think has taken on an outsized importance due to there being no other sport. But let's welcome our guests. First, he's the beating heart of all the Matchbook podcasts, gutted that the NFL Draft will post no first half unders, still clinging to the hope that the Jets won't screw it up again this year. It's Matchbook Communications Manager Aidan O'Sullivan. How's it going, Sully?
Jesse May, good to see you. Good to hear from you. Good to be talking about the NFL. Good to be talking to human beings. Really excited about the NFL Draft. And I know Adam Chernoff will agree with me. The Jets can always screw up the draft.
Just don't draft a fullback. No fullback.
All right, well, let me just introduce the others then. Speaking of Adam Chernoff, he's the voice of the Simple Handicap podcast, known to go very deep into NFL numbers, now ranking all his meals according to the pace of play. Welcome, Adam. Are you excited about this draft?
You guys twisted me into doing a prop show, so I'm absolutely excited. There's no question about it.
Well, we're going to be trying to focus on the season ahead as well, so hopefully it'll be enough. And then finally, but not last, he co-hosts the Deep Dive podcast, found on Twitter as the Whale Capper, and the NFL is his white whale, Drew Dinsick. Hi, Drew. Drew, I got a question for you on a scale of 1 to 10. If 1 is barely interested and 10 is the draft doesn't happen tomorrow, you're all in. Where are you right now?
I'm at 11. This is this is the highlight of our spring and summer, guys. Like, this is where it's at. Like, actual, real, meaningful, sports information will be pouring out at us live. We have all of these options to bet it. This is going to be a ton of fun, and I can't wait to get down with these. Some of these props. I'm curious what your guys' takes are. Everybody has an opinion this time of year, and it's fantastic to hear everybody kind of speculate on what's going to happen.
I mean, it is opinions, and so let's acknowledge that it's not really your normal sports bets where you guys are looking at a line going 50-50 over under. Limited data here, rumor mill can cave a market, and I mean we've seen swings in markets that go from even money, then they've come out to minus 1,000 and stuff like that, guys. How do you approach that from a betting perspective? I mean, is something a lock first of all, and can you really find value in odds that big and that small? Drew first.
Okay, so for sure, this entire information cycle gives bettors the opportunity to really kind of take advantage of some market inefficiencies. This isn't your standard price discovery experiment where you have market making books out there or exchanges in the case of Matchbook hanging these markets where price discovery is effectively built out of the fact that you have enormous liquidity coming into these pools. These are very different pools in terms of how they construct these markets. And there's not a Don Best screen to really kind of everybody to be on the same page, book to book to book, and that presents massive opportunities for the players to construct synthetic holds that are in advantage of the player to arbitrage and to shoot for middles across different player props. And the name of the game should much more be find inefficiencies at various books than and you really. The best advice we can really give anyone listening to this is don't take your opinion of a player. Don't take your opinion of who will be good or succeed in the NFL and make bets based on that, because that's not at all what we're trying to do.
Right. I think Drew's talked off. Adam, just to go to you for a second, is there data, if any, that you think you can use to try and get a handle on this draft?
Trying to come up.
Oh, he just came back.
There he is.
I think Drew nailed it in what he was saying. Like, we're now sort of victims of beat writer ping pong going back and forth as we're seeing people publish an article and then all of a sudden it moves a market, as you're saying, a significant amount. So we're sort of at the mercy of a lot of the information coming out. But in terms of having any data, it's extremely difficult. I guess in years past, you could look to certain tendencies of teams and how personnel have drafted. But considering this year that all the team facilities are closed and people can't travel between teams and do their own physicals or have their own health staff, it's really heavily leaning on information. And even that is extremely difficult to come by. So very different from years past, for sure.
Sully, is there, when you look at the draft, the first round, let's say, all the positions top to bottom, is there a specific number, a specific draft position that excites you the most?
Yeah, I think it's probably the most obvious one, Jess. It's the, what have we got? The Lions at 3. Because obviously they've got a lot of Patriots personnel in that organization right now. And the Patriots have never picked 3 since, I think, about the year of 1998, 1999, that kind of well. So I think they're probably very much looking for a trade partner. Whether they get one or not, that's another key thing. But I mean, if they land at 3, if they stay at 3, chances are they'll probably take Akuda. They're the best cornerback in the draft. I really like what Drew said there. It's not about what we think as, people who watch a lot. Personally, I watch a lot of college football, and I can kind of judge these players from what I prefer, but it's not about that. It's basically trying to find, and like Adam said, cut beneath the noise and think, look, they're going to say this kind of stuff. I mean, look at Gettleman with the Giants saying that they really did their homework on Justin Herbert. They're not going to take Justin Herbert. They're just doing that to hope that a team says, oh my God, the Giants are going to take a quarterback of 4. And then we go, okay, I want to get into 4. That's all that is. So smokes and mirrors abound. But I think there's definitely value to be found because odds compilers all of a sudden have to become odds compilers. Madness.
So do you agree, Drew and Adam, that I think 3 and 5, I know, Drew, you said on your deep dive podcast that 1, 2, and 4 doesn't look like a quarterback can go there. Is it really 3 and 5 that everybody's looking at right now?
Yeah, no. And to go back to your question previously, is there a lock in the draft? The likelihood that it's anything other than Burrow and Chase Young as the 1 and 2 picks is very, very small, in my opinion. But every insider I've talked to that has connections to the Redskins kind of echoing the same sentiment. They have married themselves now to this idea that they're taking Chase Young. That's good enough. That's good enough for me to say, okay, well, time comes, they're not going to be able to find reasonable compensation for a trade for someone else to take him. There's not, the quarterback market overall, in my opinion, for this draft seems very soft. And it's kind of built out of this sort of the structure of who's got picks, who's got capital, and who needs what position. You look across the NFL right now and you can say, yeah, there's a little bit of a quarterback shortage. There's not great quarterbacks across this league. There's not 20 guys that you're really super excited to go to war with. But as you look down at teams and how they've constructed, their rosters and what they've said this offseason, really only Cincinnati and Miami look like clear, surefire. These teams will take a quarterback in this draft. 2 is not a lot, right? And we've come into many drafts before where there's been 6, 8 teams who you could see, if the price is right, they would move up, they would upgrade their quarterback position. They're in this draft to find the quarterback of the future. And that's just not the case this year outside of Cincinnati, who we know is going to take number 1 overall quarterback, and then Miami, who we presume is going to take a quarterback at number 5. The fact that there probably is some other team out there, we don't know because we haven't heard that teams aren't super truthful. If you have eyes for a quarterback and that there's a chance that some could slide, you're going to keep it under wraps that's your intention in this draft to prevent there being some sort of a run. And I think that has set up this scenario where the Lions at 3 have a pick with enormous value. That's the type of pick where if there are quarterbacks who can be franchise carrying quarterbacks over the next 10 years, they most likely are going to get picked in the top 5. And you could say that about Tua. You can potentially say that about Herbert, which means the Lions should be trying to trade that 3 pick if they're not going to take one of those players. Problem is the Miami Dolphins have the most draft capital of any team in the NFL by far, which means that for some team to trade up into that 3 pick, you're going to have to beat the Dolphins, whatever offer they could put together. This fundamentally de-incentivizes teams like the Chargers, teams like the Jaguars, teams like the Patriots, even maybe teams that may be in the market for a first-round quarterback. They're just not going to be able to come up with an offer that's going to beat whatever the Dolphins finally come away with. So why bother? And so I think all this has kind of created this scenario where the Lions have this pick of value. It ought to be traded in a normal year where kind of everybody has kind of equal assets and they have lots of time. With people in draft rooms together to facilitate a trade. Maybe this 3 pick gets traded. Maybe some team goes up and takes a quarterback. But in this particular year, I think especially with Miami sort of serving as a blocker or this kind of monster within the draft process that has so many assets that would block anyone else, you're just not going to see a fair deal for that 3 pick, which I think leads back to what Sully said, which they're going to get stuck making that pick likely. And these guys are all on the hot seat. Coach is on the hot seat. GM is on the hot seat. If they don't put together a winning season this season, all of these guys are getting fired, which means they have to pick a player that can be a starter, plug and play day one. And, no better place than attacking the enormous hole you just made by trading Darius Slay and taking Okudah. So this, we're kind of fleshing this out in terms of what makes sense to the team. I haven't heard insiders from the Lions say they are really super excited about Okudah. It's not like they're falling over themselves. They can't wait to make this pick. I think they would desperately still love to trade down to 5 to 6 to 9 and take a shot at Okudah there rather than take him with 3. But it's just too tough, I think, this year to see them get this trade pulled off.
Jesse,
Adam, I know you like. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sully.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on one thing that Drew said in regards to quarterbacks. You were asking about a lock, right? There was one price at Matchbook yesterday. It's gone now. Under 4.5 quarterbacks in the first round was a 1.25. Now, to me, that's a 10s on, a 20s on shot. There is no way that Jalen Hurts, Jake Fromm, Jacob Eason is jumping into the first round. There's no way anyone is going to give up a first round pick on any of those guys. So even if you look around, there may be a book that just gets one of these wrong. You might get a 3s, a 4s, a 5s on shot, and it's money for absolute jam.
So you like it at 1.2? You still betting it at 1.1?
Love it at 1 point. I haven't got that kind of capital, Jesse, unfortunately.
No, you throw it in your parlays, right?
But that just jumped out at me, 1.25. And I always find that with quarterback markets, they're probably unevenly priced in the sense that people want to back the overs. They get enamored with quarterbacks. They might, watch Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma and Alabama and say, oh, God, this guy's got to be in the first round. But that's not how the NFL works. And Drew hit on it there. There's probably 2 teams that were pretty certain to go and take quarterbacks. After that, it's an open crapshoot.
So Adam, just want to get back to the Lions because I know you're big on predicting lineups and stuff like that. Is that legitimately the Lions' natural hold that they should pick a big cornerback right now? Is that going to make them the team?
I think that there's probably a fair chance that Derek Brown ends up going 3rd overall. If you look at the Lions as a team and what they need, obviously the secondary, not only they get rid of Slay, but they got rid of Diggs late last season as well. And we know what he meant to that locker room. So there's obviously a huge void at secondary, but I think arguably they have the weakest defensive line in the NFL. I don't think that's a stretch to say this far out. And so let's see what ultimately happens there. But I'm not sure that Okudah is necessarily dead set for 3. We've seen his price sort of drift the other way. I think there's a chance that he could potentially slide a little bit, but I wouldn't be too shocked if they end up going Brown in that 3 spot.
So let's talk Tua then. I mean, we have his stock has really dropped. Drew, I know you've got a lot of Tua thoughts. What we saw on Matchbook, I mean, the over under for Tua was 4.5. Now it's gone down to 5.5. But I think you're kind of making the case that you actually don't think 5 is in play because Miami's more likely to take Herbert.
Everything I can tell you from everything I've read, from all of the beat writers that you can get plugged into in Miami, from talking to a couple of college coaches, it looks pretty likely that Miami is not in on Tua. Like, they haven't done their due diligence. They haven't really prepared themselves to take him, which to me says, they have internal medical red flags on this guy where they're just not, he's not the guy they're going after. That leads you to say, okay, well, if they need a quarterback, then obviously is that Herbert? Is there someone else that they especially have eyes for? Do they even intend to take a quarterback with the 5th pick? And I've taken some positions. I think it's reasonably likely they do go with a pick for Herbert in the 5 hole, just because there are other teams that I know have interest in Herbert. And I don't think if you're the Miami Dolphins, you can take a shot on an offensive tackle, which is a position of need, and hope that Herbert happens to be there when you're picking again, later in round 1. It's a risk, but it's rare when a team decides on their quarterback. It is extremely rare that they wait and then take him later when they have an early in the first round opportunity to do so. We saw with the Giants last year, there was no need for them to pick Daniel Jones number 6. They probably could have gotten him in the 2nd round. There just wasn't any demand for that player, but they did their due diligence. They went through their process. They decided and telegraphed long beforehand that Daniel Jones was the guy they had eyes for. And rather than wait and take him at 17, rather than take him later in the first round, they took him with 6 overall. And that, I think, is a lot, a lot of similarities with how this will play out with Justin Herbert likely going to the Dolphins at 5. And I got to tell you, if you were operating under the assumption that the Dolphins will not draft Tua, that starts to make it very difficult to figure out where he's going to land.
Well, I mean, the over/under on the 5.5 for Tua right now is basically even money. Are you strong on the over there, or are you looking more to take a Herbert position?
I think a lot of this is price dependent because, again, there is still a realistic possibility that someone offers, say the Chargers, maybe Chargers who are notoriously play close to the vest with their decision making with their picks. We really have no idea who they prefer in this draft. We don't even know if it's going to be offense or defense realistically. And for that reason, for all we know, they will give the 6th overall pick to the Lions plus, next year's second rounder, and the Lions would just take anything in addition to the top 10 pick just to make that deal happen. That could manifest, and they could move up to 3 and they could take Tua, or they could move up to 3 and scoop Herbert, which then I still think that the Dolphins are out on Tua, which then who knows where his bottom is at that point. So there's a small chance that someone trades up to 3 for Tua. That maybe I'll qualitatively say it's in the 25% range that the Lions either just take him himself, take Tua themselves for whatever reason, or they find a trade partner who comes up for Tua at 3. That's probably a 25% possibility.
Well,
if he
so
doesn't
now we're talking about even money being an awesome bet for over 4.5. Adam, do you like that as well for Tua, or do you see something else?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. Unless there's a trade, it's probably going to be you have to look at Miami, and they're leaning towards Herbert as far as everything that's coming out and that's being made public. But if you're looking at that over under 4.5 or 5.5, that 5 spots basically what you're sort of straddling around, because it's unlikely he's going to go 6, 7, or 8. I think if he ends up not going to Miami, or there's not a trade, he could reasonably slip to Jacksonville at number 9. That's probably a decent spot for him to go if he slips through. But it's not one that I've got involved with, not one I'm going to get probably into sometime now, and between the draft. But I could certainly see him sliding to 9 in the draft.
Right. So, Sully, I mean, based on what they're saying, the truth is if you don't really think Tua can go 5, then the under 4.5 at I think it's plus 250 that sounds like.
I think that's flipped though, Jesse. That price was that way last week. So that is flipped. I think it's 3's on. He's over 4.5 now, and it's about 2-1 under 4.5 now. So that will but Jesse, let's be honest about it. These markets are moving so much. I mean, that could have been a different way yesterday. It's absolutely nuts. I mean, I won't lie. The thing about Justin Herbert that kind of fascinates me is the NFL still kind of, falls into this recency bias category, right? So if you look back, Tua got injured in November. We haven't seen him for weeks and months, okay? Justin Herbert plays on New Year's Day in the Rose Bowl, has a fantastic game against a pretty good Wisconsin defense. Drew, we were on Wisconsin plus, we were on Oregon plus 3, weren't we? Yeah. So we've got good memories of Justin Herbert. And I'll go back further. Jamarcus Russell had an absolutely unbelievable game for LSU against Notre Dame, and he was drafted number 1 by the Oakland Raiders at the time. I'll be honest, kind of based on the fact that he torched the Notre Dame secondary, that was absolutely woeful anyway, but I'm going totally back in time here. But I honestly do think I've actually betted elsewhere Justin Herbert at 2.25 ahead of Tua, and that was a cracking bet. I think Brad Allen, who didn't want to come onto this pod because he's not really into the draft, I know full well that Brad has bet this as well. So yeah, that was a pretty good one for me. I think Justin Herbert is slightly underrated by a lot of teams, but like Drew said, everything I've heard as well about Miami, Tua ain't going to South Beach.
All right, well let's look at some of these offense defense betting markets. They're up on Matchbook. They've been quite popular in a lot of the American sports books. I think they're interesting because they allow you to kind of take an overall view about what does this team need, offense or defense more. There's some massive prices in terms of opinions for a lot of these teams. I mean, Miami right now is minus 1.1. Choose an offensive player. New England is pick 'em either side. Maybe that fits New England. Any of these teams stand out for any of you guys as in the top 10 or 20 as being very clear that they're focusing offense versus defense? Adam?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think good, Adam.
I took two at significantly better prices right when these hit. I think there's no way Denver doesn't go on the offensive side. That price is long gone. But I think that's a dead spot for a receiver to go at 15. And then I also went and I got involved with Philadelphia going offense as well. I think that's another spot that's sort of in concrete that they're going to be looking for a wide receiver too. So both of those.
But when you say in concrete, I mean, how do you attach a price to that? How far will you go?
I took the Eagle. Well, so to put it in perspective, I've got a lot of stuff correlated to wide receivers going in the first round, and I've got a lot of stuff correlated to Justin Jefferson going 21 or higher, or higher as in at a better draft position than 21. I always mix it up with the over-under. So I took Jefferson 21 or better, and then I took wide receivers. I've got a lot of stuff dialed in there, but then I also added on to that, taking Eagles to go offensive player at their position too. I took a net of minus 240 on that. So that's 1.44 top of my head. So no. And so, I mean, I'll take that one up to probably 1.33. I'm not sure what it is right now at Matchbook, but that's my breaking point on that price. But so much of it is correlated into other stuff that I've bet too. But I'm pretty, if Jefferson goes 21 or better, then I'm going to be pretty pleased come draft day on Thursday.
21 or lower, right? I'm still confused.
20, it's exactly 21 or lower.
Better than up, it's long.
Yeah.
I had one.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just had one quick thought on this. I'll give it back to Drew then, because I didn't really actually play these markets, but there was one I was looking at here, and I think Adam may agree with this. The Chargers defense, it's just under 5-1 a Matchbook of 5.9 currently. To me, they're picking at 6, and the general narrative seems to be that it's kind of quarterback for the Chargers, because A, they're moving to the new stadium, B, they're losing their share of voice in a massive way in LA. They haven't had a share of voice. And everyone just seems to think that they've got to take Tua, they've got to take Herbert if they fall to them at 6. But Tom Telesco, their GM, has always been a kind of a pick the best player on the board that's in front of you, no matter what the position, no matter what the team need. So I think that's an exceptional amount of value. I'm not saying Tyrod Taylor is the future at quarterback for the Chargers, but you got to remember there's still 3 big quarterbacks in free agency: Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, and Andy Dalton, that they could pick up here post-draft as well. So you got to remember that those guys are still in play. They're not in the draft, but they're still very much in play. So I'm not totally sure what the guys' thoughts are on that, but I just think that's a bit of value there at close to 5-1 Chargers defense first pick.
I completely agree with that. A reasonable price on that ought to be like, I don't know, $3, 2-1-ish. I think the Telesco is known as a guy that takes best player available, and almost certainly Simmons is going to be on the board at that point in time. Possibly Brown is on the board at that point in time. Possibly Okuda is on the board at that point in time. And Simmons, while to me, that's a pretty redundant pick, because, I think obviously Derwin James is one of the best at that, kind of, free-form position between safety, linebacker, cornerback in the NFL. So I don't know that they need another player that has all those tools, but we know Telesco values that. And so a second opportunity to add a guy like that who's that versatile to your defense, we could see it. I agree with you. There's probably about a 33% chance that that the Chargers pick defense, and that's not what the market reflects right now.
I thought the Dallas market was really interesting here. Now they're picking, I guess, 17, but there was a lot of consensus that Dallas just absolutely has to go defense. I think that market opened up around minus 400, 1.25. It's come all the way in now. It's still the defense is still a favorite, but it's around 1.5, 1.66. Is it really up in the air?
Yeah, this is kind of one of those this is one of those where you have to kind of read between the lines in terms of what the team intends, as opposed to every mock drafter who looks at the team need and looks at every level of defense and says these guys will absolutely need to backfill at these positions, so they will. For all we know, they feel like they have invested all this in their offense and their young quarterback. They need to give him more weapons. So they could take one of the amazing wide receivers that are available in that 17th spot. But I think reasonably, 60-65% probably a reasonable qualitative percent that the Dallas Cowboys take a defensive player. What's strange is that what they desperately need is really a young infusion of pass rush. They need, a kind of an edge rusher, outside linebacker type of player. And there's not a ton of depth in this draft for that type of player. So they're kind of out of luck in that regard, which I think does open up the possibility that they do something wild and take a player on offense. So that's not a bad shout. It's just, it's that they haven't really tipped their hand much.
So, I think I hear what you're saying. I don't know if you guys agree with it. Like after a certain level of the draft, maybe it's pick 8, maybe it's pick 10. It is kind of 50-50, and it's not 50-50, but they could take anybody because these guys will take on some level best player available. And I think that means that on a certain level, some of the really big underdog prices here for offense, defense should come in play.
Well, see, Jess, this is the other thing. I think what a market I'd love to bet on, and I don't think it's available. There seems to be this common perception that there's going to be a whole lot of trades in the first 10 to 15 picks this year. I don't see it. I can't see it. I think there's maybe 1, maybe 2. And also they have these new technologies that the teams are using. They're using Zoom. This is a brand new, playbook for these teams. Maybe by Saturday, when you're into the 5th or the 6th round, they'll become more comfortable. I think this is going to be a very conservative draft. I don't think that you've heard so many different rumors about the Patriots jumping up into the early 10, 11 picks for a quarterback. I can't see this either. They're not going to give it away. And I don't even think they have that much capital. The only team that I'm looking here on the board, like we said, the Dolphins have 2 more picks in the first round at 18 and 26. But after that, there's not a lot of teams that have multiple picks that can really move that forward in the draft. And I think you're right in the sense that with the Cowboys in particular, I know one of their biggest needs is safety. And I think the safeties in this year's draft, there's nobody projected to go in the first round anyway. That if they wanted to wait until the second round and maybe trade up, so maybe you're right there. 3.1 offense for the Cowboys might be a nice little play.
Yeah, I'll give you one for the Cowboys too. I think they ultimately end up going with a center, as Travis Frederick kind of left them hanging just a couple of weeks ago. There's Cesar Ruiz from Michigan. He's been rising the last 72, 96 hours. His price coming in a little bit. So I actually think that not only are we seeing that price come back with their offense-defense split, but I think that center's probably where the Cowboys end up going, and sort of the price moves are reflective of that.
Offensive line is very interesting, Joe, isn't it? I mean, I know you backed over 5.5, but that line is 6.5 and shading over now, because I think a lot of people forget that the offensive line is not just left tackle, right tackle. You've also got your guard and your centers too.
For sure. And Adam's point's reasonable, is pretty strong, actually. I didn't think about the Cowboys going O-line, but they've gotten kind of the most positive feedback over the last 10 years, for taking lots of early offensive line, players. And, when you're kind of, you can kind of predict certain general managers, certain team owners tend to do things a certain way in the draft. Like, yeah, I agree with you that there's not going to be a ton of trades, but guess what? Is Seattle going to do everything in their everything possible to trade out of their first round pick? Yes, because that's kind of their MO now. Similarly with the Patriots, I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade into the second round out of the first. But that it's going to be much more difficult to facilitate that stuff this year with the way that the draft is going to be. From a structural standpoint, it's just going to be a heck of a lot tougher. And I think it also makes it a heck of a lot more. Jesse's questions, point off the top really is this. Is there a point in the draft where it becomes very uncertain and you really don't know what's going to happen, and after this point, you really ought to be looking for big prices. I would say without a doubt, either after pick 5, which obviously everything is speculative from the Chargers on, in my opinion, just because we have no idea where they're going to go. We think defense for Panthers, but I would say defense for Panthers is probably one of the more solid, positional directions that a team is going to go. And then 8, 9, 10, these are all picks that, if it's best player available, if you're looking at a specific tier where you want to plug in surefire starters, it's going to be offensive tackles. Like, this is a very top heavy talent group in terms of positional, just kind of the distribution of players, right? Some positional groups, there's a couple of guys who are very clearly good, and then a couple in the tier below that, and a couple in the tier below that. Well, the way I see the offensive tackle, from a prospect standpoint, there is a cluster of guys who absolutely are surefire NFL starters, probably week 1 of this season. And there's about six of them. And after that, there's a big drop off to the next tier, which means if you're looking at your roster and you're like, man, we really need an offensive line starter this year, it is imperative that you get him in the first round, because you're not going to be scooping guys on day 2, day 3 of the draft who you're going to be able to develop into a starter level offensive line contributor this year. So I do think that creates sort of, a scarcity combined with, there being a top tier talent available, where we see at a minimum 6 offensive linemen taken. And if a player like Ruiz goes, that's your number 7 right there. There's even some other guys who are kind of on the bubble. Isaiah Wilson from Georgia could sneak into the first round. You could get up to 8.
The market reflects that right now. It was over under 5.5. I think looking back about a week ago for offensive linemen. Now, not only is it over under 6.5, but the over is, minus 160-ish.
Because the Deep Dive podcast came out talking about this. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Move the lines.
Is that a little bit too far for you, Adam? I mean, to see 7 and I still have to be laying money?
No, I think it's just reflective of what we're likely to see. And I think that Ruiz coming in is probably driving that up a little further from 6.5 to 7. But I think, like Drew said, you're sort of looking at 6 guys. And again, there's plenty of need for that with these teams. So there's like sort of the supply and demand issue like you're getting at. So I think I'm not running to bet over 6.5. If you have 5.5 in your pocket, you're probably looking at a winner. But at that price, I'm probably not too interested. But I could definitely see it getting to 7 with Ruiz ending up in Dallas on the offensive line.
I mean, it sounds like you guys think in a lot of places the market has actually started to correct itself. Where in particular is the market still just plain wrong? Is it hard? What about the wide receivers? A lot of talk about wide receivers. Yeah.
I'll start with one. I'm just stay on the offensive line. One I bet there about 5 days ago. I could be pronouncing this guy wrong. Tristan Wirfs of Iowa. I think he could go to the Giants at 4. And he is, you can get about 3.0, 4.0 to be the top offensive lineman picked. So I'll play that one. So that's my one on that. Because and you know what? I think a lot of it is Jedrick Wills, the guy that's the top one, is at Alabama, and a lot of it is just the Alabama name. I think they're pretty much it's a coin toss between these two guys because Wirfs comes from Iowa, and that's I've just seen a bit of value there on that one. Wide receivers, guys. I don't know if you've seen this, Adam, though. Have you seen the market without the top 3? So you've got Ruggs, CeeDee Lamb, and Jerry Jeudy. I've seen Justin Jefferson at 5th or 6th in that betting. I think that's an interesting market. If you could get him to be the 4th wide receiver ahead of T. Higgins, that might be worth a play.
I took Jefferson. One of my favorite props is Jefferson before Mims and Higgins.
Okay.
Yeah. So I ended up taking that. I mean, what way is the wind blowing, right? It depends.
Yeah.
Like we saw last week, sort of the flavor of the week was wide receivers going overs. People put out some mock drafts. Everyone listened to everyone else. They followed it, and they were piling on wide receivers. Now it's offensive linemen. So now the offensive linemen are going up. The wide receivers are going down. We're seeing that market come back in a bit. So in terms of where it's wrong, I don't think that there's really a spot that I can necessarily point to one way or the other. But it's just that beat writer ping pong going back and forth that's sort of putting there. But I do think over 5.5 wide receivers, a prop that I really like. I think we see at least 6. There's, in my count, 10 teams that have expressed needs or gone out and contacted multiple wide receivers. So there's certainly the demand there. And again, this is going to be probably one of the deepest wide receiver classes we've seen. And really your opinion on this probably depends on, do you think the teams are going to go early for offensive linemen and then wait because the class is so deep on wide receivers, or if you're going to get 3 guys off the board in the first 13, 14 picks, and then that leaves a lot of space in sort of the last 6 or 7 picks of the round for a couple of these guys to be scooped up, with Jefferson going, in my opinion, pretty solidly at 21 to the Eagles. So it really just whatever side of the fence you're on, but it's pretty clear. Offensive players versus defensive players got smoked early and heavy across the board. Every sportsbook you looked, offensive linemen followed and wide receivers followed. And now it's just really a lot of people sort of trying to be different with their mock drafts and coming out with one or the other. And that's just affecting the market depending on their audience. So we're sort of stuck at the mercy of that right now with some of these price moves.
I like that Justin Jefferson, 4th wide receiver off the board. That is a very, very, very solid look.
Yep.
What I can tell you, kind of looking across teams, looking across, beat writers talking about team boards, everyone who's talking about wide receivers, it is pretty clear that the top 3 in the wide receiver tier, and that being Lamb, Judy, and Ruggs in some order, the likelihood that any of those guys are available come pick 16 is pretty low. And I say this, and I think that Denver clearly has tipped their hand. They love Ruggs. Team like the Raiders have tipped their hand that they're very high on Judy. A team like the Eagles, I know, is extremely high on Judy. They are candidates to try to trade up and get ahead of some of these wide receiver likely landing spots in sort of the 10-11 range. So, these guys are all the top 3 guys are probably going to be gone by the time the Broncos pick at 15. So that you look at that and you're like, well, if 3 guys are going to be gone by 15, then surely we're going to have 6 wide receivers taken in the first round, right? And I see pretty clearly across draft boards that Jefferson is considered the number 4 pick. And I think the likely landing spot is he goes 22 to Minnesota. There's been enough smoke. There's been enough Minnesota tipping their hand that they like Jefferson, that I think that's probably where we see him come off the board. The problem is, after Jefferson, nobody really agrees on who the 5th best wide receiver is. Every team kind of has a different, from 5 to 12, there's the same group of guys, but every team's kind of got them in their own order, which I think probably causes a little bit of, the market just isn't especially active in the late first round for wide receivers, because there's not a ton differentiating these guys, and teams know, hey, okay, well, we really like this guy, but he might fall to us at the top of the second round. We don't have to trade back into the bottom of the first to get him. I think, whereas we could see a scenario here where 4 wide receivers are gone by pick 22, and then maybe only 1 more. And who that 5th one is, I don't think we really know. I'm not seeing a ton of momentum for a guy like Higgins. I'm not seeing a ton of momentum for some of the other guys who have been named, the kid from Arizona State, Ayuk. I'm not seeing, there's a clear and obvious match with some of these teams in the bottom of the first round. The only guy that I see there is some demand for is Rieger. He may be the 5th guy off the board, but I could entirely see a scenario where under 5.5 wide receivers comes in, and that's a pretty big price right now.
And yeah, good plus money, Jesse, 2.68 currently at Matchbook, so that might be one to have a look at. I think quite interesting on the wide receivers. Chatting to someone else recently, one of the biggest props that I've chatted to 2 other people, different sportsbooks. One of the biggest props they've seen is Henry Ruggs to be top receiver. Now, the value seems to be gone. It was kind of like 5 to 1 at one stage, and now you can barely back it at 3 to 1. And it's kind of weird how, and we touched on it early, how players get certain buzz through, beat writers writing about him. But if you look at Ruggs on the field, he's barely played for Alabama. He hasn't been on the field, but he's a 3rd or 4th wide receiver for them. And if you just break down Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, there's surely a bit of a gap there. But it just goes to show hype, always reflects in the price.
Can't teach speed.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, he just seemed to have a look at Tyreek Hill about him. But yeah, it's interesting. I think we wide receivers covered, Jesse, under 5.5. Throw in.
Yeah. That sounds good to me. I just want to cover one thing before we go to best bets, which is saw an article which said that traditionally after the draft, that actually, even though it's so hyped, the draft doesn't have a huge effect on outright prices, season prices, over-unders, and stuff like that. I feel like it might be different this year because there's been so much hype, and we might actually see the crowd start to pile in on some teams in the anticipation that they've had a good or bad draft. Anything you guys might be looking for where you're saying, if this team does this, I'm going to absolutely lay them, but if they get this done, it will be good? I mean, any thoughts about how we should attack that after the draft?
That was my article, Jesse.
Oh, that was
my article.
It was on Pinnacle. It was a great article, by the way, Adam. Like, yep.
That was it was. There's only been 4 teams in the last 5 seasons that have seen their outright odds to win the Super Bowl increase by more than 2% before a week of draft to the end of the draft. So really, there's just a much higher rating for players already in the league, and they impact the value much more than anyone coming into the league. But I think that it's going to play very similar this year with so much uncertainty, and we're just not going to see much movement at all unless there's a significant trade, which given how the draft structure is going to be, I think it's just going to be so much more challenging to get that done this year. So I think we'll see the markets hold pretty static.
Yeah, I just asked Jesse just before we get to best bets. I just wanted to get Drew's opinion on CJ Henderson, because I know you mentioned him on the Deep Dive podcast. I think the first line that was put up was 16.5. What I've seen now is 12.5, and it's a good shade of plus money on the under. What are your thoughts there, Drew? Is that one to just maybe avoid? Because obviously the second cornerback in the draft, Okudah, is going to go first, but a lot of teams have spoken highly of CJ Henderson.
I mean, if Okudah doesn't go third overall, you could see Henderson be the first cornerback off the board, because there are a lot of teams that I have heard reliable information that they have Henderson rated higher than Okudah as CB1 in this draft, this talent pool. Reasonable landing spots for him at this point are 9 to the Jaguars. Jaguars need everything, so they could take a cornerback. He could land. I particularly think he could still land with 13 at the Niners. The Niners are doing one of the most masterful jobs of. They have a pick that's high leverage. 13 is very important because there's going to be some top tier. There's still going to be a top tier offensive lineman available. Probably there's still going to be a top tier cornerback and wide receiver available. So that'll be a really valuable pick. And they're kind of figuring out who everyone else below them likes and leaking that they may be taking this guy. Like, oh yeah, we kind of like Kinlaw. He'd be a great guy to backfill Buckner, because they know that some other team in 16 covets Kinlaw, or oh, we really like Ruggs. Ruggs is our guy, because they know the Broncos love Ruggs at 15. They're doing this. They're doing the most spectacular job of sowing misinformation that's going to get them some interest in that 13th pick, or at least, cause someone else to leap them, in which case an even better player falls in their lap. But I think a guy like Henderson could go to San Francisco, because San Francisco's greatest need, in my opinion, is still their secondary. And I would expect that, so 9 and 13 are reasonable landing spots for Henderson. And if not 9 or 13, then 16 to the Falcons is probably the natural landing spot. So I still do think he comes in under 16.5. I'm happy to have a price that was, relatively soft early on. It's moved in the correct direction. But if you made me make a decision on 12.5 at this moment, I would probably take over.
Okay. Good to know. Sorry.
So Sully, just back to you though. I mean, how are the Jets, 2 spots ahead, going to screw it up here? They're 1.22 to go offense. Is that a wide receiver? Is that what it is?
No, I think it's going to be tackle. Adam might have probably more thoughts on this, because I've kind of not kept up with Joe Douglas and the Jets of recent times. I think that's nailed on offense one way or the other. I think it's offensive line or wide receiver one way or the other. Adam, any thoughts for the Jets?
Well, they might go fullback again, and we get a 25-year
There are no fullbacks.
I think it depends how the offensive tackles go ahead of them. But I think that it'll go offensive tackle and then wide receiver. It just depends how it shakes up in front of them.
I mean, from a comedy point of view, to watch this draft, who is the worst general manager out there that we should just expect to absolutely, just slaughter it every pick?
Dave Gettleman, the guy who can't use a PC. It's got to be him, or a MacBook, or a phone.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you who else. Who else deserves a ton of criticism is Bill O'Brien, obviously,
yes.
for a lot of things. But this is one of the better drafts we've had in like 5 years. And where are the Texans picking around one? Oh, that's right. They've traded away their first round picks. Oh, I wish maybe if they had an asset who was worth a first round pick that they could have, trade. Oh, wait, they traded him for a second rounder. So yeah, I think we have to look at a guy like Bill O'Brien and the fact that he's not going to make a day one pick in this very talent heavy draft and kind of point the finger there.
All right. Let's go best. But there's a market on Matchbook just looking ahead to this season. I mean, some people might be interested. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on it. There's a market up there about the number of regular season NFL games we played in 2020. It's obviously a lot of people weighing in on this, and this is the kind of thing that maybe companies are going to be looking to weigh in on to hedge their bets. But there's a couple over-unders here. The over-under 239.5, I think that basically equates to them starting on time and playing every week without a break. Do you guys think there's value in any of these, or do you have a strong opinion right now about how the NFL season is going to play out in 2020?
Just on that one, Jesse, I don't have a massive opinion on it yet. I think with 239.5, if there's 256 regular games in a regular season, and that's including the bye, I would say that's 14 weeks and no bye. Does anyone want to correct me on that? Or I think that if it was 15 weeks, it would be over 240, I think, unless someone wants to do the maths.
Well, I mean, essentially the market is saying a late start and no bye is kind of the way I'm reading it.
Yeah, that's the way I would interpret it too. We can turn this into an enormous political discussion, but I'm joking. From just putting everything aside with what's going on and all the circumstances, there's some at least information we know, and it's that the NBA said they need 4 weeks. College football programs said that they need 6 to 7 at a minimum. You would think that the NFL probably falls in line right at that 7-week mark, which puts them on the clock. There's no team facilities open right now, so that means facilities would have to be open. OTAs we know are going to be canceled. All off-season workouts, rookie reporting, that's going to be canceled right after the draft. So you're going to need the team facilities opened the second week in July with these players reporting and showing up to have a chance really to start the season on time. And the one thing that scares me is Anthony Sills, who's the medical officer for the NFL. While everyone was saying the season's going to go ahead, everything's going to be fine, he came out and said, I don't see a situation where the league can have games if there's still a chance that if one person has it, then everyone else has the potential to be affected. So we haven't really seen him weigh in yet, but you're going to need the facilities open second week in July for a legitimate chance to have this season start on time. So we're on the clock now with, I guess, 8 to 9 weeks in our pocket right now. So we'll see how it works out, but I think we're all hoping for the best.
I think, Jesse, we should all definitely be backing under 0.5
That's the insurance policy.
We're going to be,
right?
That's the insurance policy.
Yep.
We're all going to be so depressed if it doesn't go ahead. If it does go ahead, we're going to be happy anyway.
There's value in that number anyway.
You put $1,000, $2,000 on that, and you get a nice number, and then all of a sudden you have a nice return in your pocket if things go south.
Yeah, here's Adam's points were all spot on. The thing that I have yet to hear logistical experts kind of weigh in on that would give me hope that they're going to get a season played team sports period in 2020. People all kind of look at professional leagues and say, yeah, they'll figure it out. Like, they can play without fans. Big deal. Right. I mean, okay, fine. So so there's no ticket sale revenue. Okay, fine. So there's no concession revenue. Okay. So overall, we're talking about at a minimum, the league is going to take a chunk, 20% of revenue, something like that. And people are like, they just look at TV revenue and they think, oh, well, there's so much of that, like that'll make up for it. Right. Or like everyone will be home. They'll all want to watch. So more people than ever will be watching. Well, that's true of what's happening now across the media landscape for cable news and stuff. And the advertising model is still collapsing out from under these people. And the likelihood that the networks themselves are going to have, the same ad buys this fall that you would normally have for an NFL season. We're going to have car ads. We're going to have, movie trailer ad. There's a lot of, kind of specific advertising niche areas that I don't know if are coming back anytime soon in terms of buying ads. Even though all of these people may be watching these games, I can still see a pretty massive contraction in terms of TV revenue. At which case, can places like ESPN and CBS, can they float that? Can they eat the loss? No, I don't think they can do that by themselves. They're going to have to turn around and get the NFL to step in and take a little bit less in terms of their broadcasting rights. And in which case, so now you're saying, okay, well, you could have a contraction in NFL revenue that's what, 40-50% potentially between advertising, broadcasting, and ticket sales. And now who eats that? Is it just the owners? No, they're going to have to pass that along to the players at some point. So you're realistically talking about there's going to be a massive effort needed to kind of renegotiate everything on the fly here. Because I don't know if teams are going to be able to compensate players based on the contracts that they've already signed, based on revenue targets that are going to be off by 50%. All of this is pretty. I don't know. It's a complex moving deal, and they're not even talking about that yet, which is, I think, even beyond just the time needed to ramp up for facilities, they need to get all this stuff hammered out this summer if we're going to get started on time. So, there's enough potential hiccups and issues here that I think you have to take some shots on some of these longer prices.
Yeah, hate to bet on despair, but look, bet on the under, and sport will change and be back when it's ready, I guess is the feeling. And I'm with you on that. Just seeing some of the live comments coming in from our viewers. Let me just throw a couple questions out to the floor. Bukos25 asks, do you guys like under 4.5 draft day trades, round one only? That's interesting.
I would take under 4.5 on that. I would have guessed the fair line on that should probably be 3.5. So under 4.5 makes sense.
Yeah, same error. I actually thought that line might have been a small bit higher. It's still 32 picks. So I would have thought it might have been about 5.5, but I think people are kind of obviously cottoned on to the fact that this is a very unusual draft. It's not a normal draft, but So I still think there's probably some value there.
And then Shane is asking, he's saying there's a straight forecast out there: Burrow 1 and Young 2. It was 1.36, now it's 1.1. I mean, basically, you're saying, is Chase Young actually a good bet at 1 to 10 on? From what you said, Drew, and the guys, it sounds like maybe
he's the best player in the draft.
1 to 10 on is that? I mean, that's 90%, right?
Yeah,
That's
probably like fair price. Yeah. That's probably the fair price. Yeah.
But you got to ask yourself though, Drew, on this one, right? So if you're Washington and somebody comes in and they want to go to number 2, and you're pretty confident that they're not going to take Chase Young, and if you can get down to 3 or 4 or wherever, you still take him there.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to work out how that would go. Yeah,
the fair price for Burrow going first overall is probably 1.02. Fair price for Young going 2 overall is probably 1.1-ish, maybe less. So the combo should be around 1.12, maybe in that ballpark.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah.
Jesse, there was another question there. Actually, I wanted to kind of talk about that. Singleton 81 asked, how many running backs do you think will go in the first? I think 0 as well, and that's going to be one of my best bets. So, and I think you can still get plus money on 0 because the original line was 1.5, and I think I haven't checked it today, but I think there is some plus money on that. DeAndre Wilder and Jonathan Taylor, first 2 there, maybe J.K. Dobbins. I don't think any of them are first-round picks. And running backs, we've seen so many teams get burned by drafting running backs in the first round. It just doesn't make sense when you can get them in the second or third round.
And you have to. Fournette was on the open market, like he was offered to everyone, and everyone said no. So I don't know how you can say that any of these guys could potentially have more upside than Fournette if they want a running back. Fournette's out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're probably in a few years going to see some guys choosing not to even have running backs on their roster, right? I mean, why have a running back when you can have 12 wide receivers? So I think Brad Allen will be in favor of that anyway.
Yeah, we got to start reframing the argument because it's funny to say running backs don't matter, but the real point is running backs are replaceable. And there's guys in this draft who will make great running back replacements. If you have a running back on your roster who you're thinking about paying in the next 2-3 years, you might as well, take a crack early and I don't know, maybe early second round seems like a right place to take some of these guys. But again, in the same way we were kind of talking about tiers, the top 5 running backs in this draft are pretty indistinguishable. There's not one that stands out as, the clear, obvious best prospect. So that tends to cause a little bit of a slide. And I would agree with what Sully was saying, that under a half running back makes sense. Although you can never entirely rule out GM stupidity across the league. There's some guys out there who will make a bad decision. I mean, Bill O'Brien gave away Hopkins for David Johnson, so crazy stuff will happen.
I think the only one I was kind of worried about that would draft running back towards the tail end of the first round was Kansas City, that they might take a look at someone like DeAndre Wilder would be a really good fit in that kind of offense. But I'm hoping that they might just trade out of that or something. Somebody might come back up. I think I still want to be with zero running backs and 0 tight ends, please.
Let me even more entice you, Drew. I mean, because it's not an even money proposition over under. If you take under a half, you're getting plus money. It's like plus 160, 2.6. I mean, that all of a sudden that sounds like a very good bet, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'll tell you what though. In terms of, I'm going to sweat it out with the lineman getting to 6th O lineman. Like it's still going to be a sweat, right? Like the later you have to wait into round 1 to get your draft prop graded, the more of a sweat it is. Last year, I took a bath on over 3.5 quarterbacks in round 1. It was like to the last minute. It was like, I know the Broncos want Drew Lock. Just trade into the first round and take him at the end. There were teams trying to trade down, and they didn't do it. So, any prop you play that will take till the end of round 1 is going to be a sweat. Just know it.
Well, that's what we're here for anyway. I mean, don't let all your bets get settled by number 3. I mean, who's going to – you have to watch.
It's literally the only thing that us in Ireland and the UK can really bet on now. Unscripted drama. You got to stay up till 12 or 1 o'clock on Thursday night. We're not going to get to bed till 6 or 7 Friday morning. Who cares? It's live. Yeah. We can bet on it. It's good enough.
Yeah.
Let's go best bets. Yep, sorry.
I was just going to add, if you can get a plus money price on something like under a half running back, though, and then there are other again, kind of going back to our original point on this whole cast, which was find risk-free bets. There's ways of putting under half running back into your betting queue and then finding somewhere else otherwise where you can get a plus money play where you got a middle opportunity, you got a risk-free bet on your hands. So I would attack it that way, realistically.
I mean, it's advanced arbitrage, isn't it? And in this draft, I mean, Adam was talking about the correlated stuff out there earlier. Feels like some of the books may have put a lot of correlated props out there and then not even realize that they were going to get hammered on the parlays on these things.
Yeah, they even just correlated in terms of lopsided action, I think is going to hurt a lot of these. Yeah, because there was a gold rush, in terms of getting props and up to the people because there's so many people that are itching to get their bet on for this thing, and the amount of props you generally see in the offshore space is pretty static year over year, and they end up getting they take a bath on these generally even with smaller offerings. So I can only imagine what some of these shops who are offering 500 draft props for the first time what the balance sheet's going to look like at the end of the day. It could be bad.
The trading floor on Wednesday night is going to be homesick. Well, yeah, going to be out. All right, let's go best bets. Sully, you first.
I've only got about 10 best bets. I'll give you some flavor. I've got a lot of best bets. I love a lot of bets. I think come Friday morning I could be in tears, but obviously, I think Adam said already, we bet these like 2 or 3 weeks ago. We're not trying to do the whole after timing thing here, but you kind of have to jump on these early because the money will come. So the best one I think I've bet in my head is Justin Herbert to be drafted ahead of Tua. And I backed that at 2.25. Now, I do think, and I saw one comment there, I think there's 1.8 around with some of the sports books. So I think that is there if you want to back it at odds against, a bit of odds on. The other one I mentioned as well, Wirfs to be the top O lineman. I also do like Jonathan Taylor to be the top running back in the second round. I think that's at 3.25 at the moment. And yeah, that other one. I'm a bit pissed off though, Jesse, because you said a while ago that you can get no running backs at 2.6. I backed it at 2.4. So how dumb am I? You know?
So right. So now it's double value. You're gonna have to press up. Adam, what about you? I know you're on this wide receiver prop, and is that your best one?
So biggest edge in terms of price I made it versus what was available was Michael Pittman to be drafted before both Hamler and Claypool. I got that at even money. I think that's minus 350, minus 400, so like 1.25. 1.3. That's moved a little bit in the last 2 days, but I mean, you can still find it better than 1.5, better than minus 200. So I would say if you're looking at that at a place you can offer, you can't get much down on it. But that's a really nice book to have. A lot of the stuff I've taken is moved. Stuff that's still out there at a reasonable price. CD Lamb to be the first wide receiver drafted. I like that at even money or better. I took minus 110 and minus 115, so 1.87, 1.91. So if you can get even money or better, I think that's a really good look. And then if you can find an exact price, Justin Jefferson to the Eagles, that's worth a look too in terms of the wide receiver stuff. But I like over 5.5 wide receivers, got a lot of stake on that. But just in terms of what's available prices, Lamb going first or Jefferson to the Eagles, two that you can take advantage of. And if you want to do some correlated stuff, just fade the Pac-12 in all the conference matchups as many as you can. I think that it's going to be a pretty bad first round for the Pac-12 draftees. So if you can pile some things up against the Pac-12, you'll do well.
Jesse, just before you go to Drew, can I just throw one more in there? I just saw this morning. I want to get the opinions of the guys. So the sportsbook, I won't mention them. If anyone wants the actual details of this, DM me on Twitter. 8.0 Derek Brown to be drafted by the Arizona Cardinals. I thought was ridiculous price. I have it at about 3-1, 100% line, 3 or 4 to 1, 100% line. So that was one I got as well. I didn't have too much on it, Jesse, because they probably wouldn't let me have too much. But okay, it was 7-1 shot, Jesse. Couldn't turn it down.
No, I mean now. Listen, my DM will be there in about 5 minutes. So. All right, Drew. Now, listen. We know you're all over the board here. What is out there that you're still willing to bet on, given everything that's been done so far?
I'm still willing to take a shot on Herbert under 5.5. I think the likelihood that he's still on the board after the Dolphins pick at 5 is probably 20%, and it's being lined still pretty close to 50-50. So I would bet Herbert under 5.5 all the way up to about minus 300-ish, or 1.4 or whatever that works out to in decimal. And that kind of insulates you, because I agree with Sully's take. I think Herbert will go before Tua. I think Tua does have a draft day free fall. Year in, year out, the most reliable angles to take in terms of betting these players are betting guys who have a long tail in terms of they could slide. And the number one reason that is because there's some injury concern. And that's being compounded this year because Tua had not just the hip injury that we all know about, but other injuries that teams have red flagged, and teams aren't getting to run a full physical on him. So I think Tua could reasonably slide pretty far. I have a decent amount on him, the field over the top 6 picks, which is basically to say we don't know where he's going to go, but it's not going to be to the Chargers at 6, and it might not be until pretty late in day 1. So
sounds good. So guys, I mean, is this really going to be? It's like a second Super Bowl now, right? I mean, Thursday night, locked in and loaded. Slow down.
Oh, yeah, it's great, but let's not push it that far.
Well, Shane on Twitter was asking, is it really good viewing? I mean, for the first hour or two, there will be some drama anyway, right?
Oh well, the first 15 minutes are painful. They do a prolonged kind of fanfare, and then they're ready to get the draft started, and they put 15 minutes on the clock for team 1, who we know is going to take Burrow. So, there's a good dead 30 minutes at the beginning where it's just, like, come on, let's get this started already. We know what's going to happen here. So, but after that, it starts to get pretty interesting in this year with so many draft options at play. I think it's going to be one of the better viewing experiences of drafts in years past.
And Jesse, just on the viewing side of things, I know a lot of people paused their Sky Sports subscriptions here in Europe and the UK. If you go into NFL Game Pass, you can get a free pass for the summer, so you will be able to watch it live. on Thursday night.
Very good. That's where I'll be. And I know, guys, look, thank everyone, Sully and Adam Chernoff and Drew Dinsick. You can find them all on Twitter and on their podcasts. I want to thank you guys for your contributions. And I pray and hope that everyone stays safe and that very soon we are back talking about the actual NFL. It will come. Don't worry. For myself and all the rest, have a great draft day. Have a great week. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.